Hello, this is Dr. Courtney Alex. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about executive functioning and how one might be able to improve their executive functioning, given that it seems like that's something a lot of folks are interested in improving in themselves. I can understand why. It's a very important thing in our lives, and it helps us be successful in a lot of different ways that society demands of us. But first, I thought it would be helpful to just break down what exactly is executive functioning, because it's actually sort of a complex thing. Well, because it helps us do complex things. And so I'm just going to break it down by a couple of different points and then go into some points about what helps us improve these things. So first, executive functioning is about self-restraint, or impulse control is another way that we call it. And that is exactly what it sounds like, the ability to stop an impulse before it actually happens. You can have it, it can arise, you can notice it, and you can choose to do something about it, right? So that executive functioning would be helping you do something like that. Another aspect of it is working memory. Working memory is the kind of memory that helps you kind of hold a bunch of different things in mind, like when you're multitasking, like when you're kind of switching from tabs on the computer and you're like doing this, and then like you remember, oh, I was doing this, and so I need to go back here. And so if you like walk into a room and you forget why you walked in there, that's a working memory glitch. And so working memory helps us kind of do a bunch of different things at once. And the other thing is like learning, multitasking, that all has to do with working memory. Another aspect of executive functioning is emotional control. So that kind of goes with this impulse control thing, right? Where I feel an emotion, but I don't let it completely overwhelm me, and I'm still able to, again, like observe it and then decide what I want to do about it, or decide how I want to maybe express it to another person. Executive functioning is helping me do that. Focus. The ability to focus, pay attention to one thing at a time, is another aspect of executive functioning. And as they talk about in a book that I've talked about in a previous video, ADHD 2.0, they talk about this really important kind of way of thinking about being able to focus, where that's when you're in kind of, it's called task positive network, where you're able to kind of focus on one thing, maybe exclude other things that are going to distract you from that. While you're involved in a task. The other one is the default mode network. And that is also kind of how it sounds, where it's like, it's kind of like the default, you're not necessarily engaged in a task, but that can be a time where creativity can come about. Also where ruminations can come about, where you're kind of more just like in the nether of the mind doing what it does. But with something like ADHD or difficulty with executive functioning, it's going to be difficult to click into that task positive network that helps you focus on whatever it is, right? Because executive functioning is helping you switch out of the default mode where you're like more expansive and into the like focus mode. Okay. Planning, prioritization. Okay. That's another big part of executive functioning, being able to think about all of the steps of something and figure out which one do I want to execute on, right? Executive functioning. So like, it's also about, initiating tasks too, right? Like, so now that I have seen which one is the most important one, I'm going to take action on that. Another one is time management, right? Which is important about that. Like, so not only can I identify all of the aspects of a task, I can also estimate about how long each one of those is going to take me, so I can figure out how long the whole thing in total is going to take me and how to fit that into my day. Executive functioning is helping me do that. Defining and achieving goals, that kind of also goes with what I'm saying, right? Is that I have a goal to reach each one of these points that I have like figured out go in this order and this level of importance. And I'm going to and then I'm breaking that down into like mini goals in order to get like the big thing accomplished. Flexibility actually is also an aspect of executive functioning, right? Like, so you might have figured out all of the ways all of the different points in order to get something done. Like first I need to execute on this, then I need to execute on this. But as you go through it, you might also need to kind of rethink what you're doing, right? You might need to think on your feet. Something might come up that you hadn't anticipated when you were initially looking at everything that was going to be involved in the task. Okay, so not only do we need to be able to execute, but we also need to be able to switch course if need be. Observation. So also like that ability to kind of what I was saying at the beginning, observe oneself, right? Because I think self-observation, self-awareness are a big part of regulation too, right? So again, like our executive functioning, our prefrontal cortex is really involved in executive functioning, which doesn't finish, as most of us know, right? Does not finish growing until we're in our mid-20s. It's a little bit later for men than it is for women, but let's say our mid-20s for everybody. Your brain is pretty much fully developed by then. So your executive functioning skills are, supposedly should be up by then, but like lots of different things like trauma, for example, can get in our way of being able to do that, or ADHD, for example, or neurodivergence, lots of different things. And lastly, stress tolerance. So again, like that kind of goes with the other things that I've been talking about, but a certain amount of like stress and anxiety goes into all of the things that I'm mentioning, right? Like being able to juggle different things, being able to prioritize things, being able to regulate myself in the face of something that is stressful, like maybe a time restraint, figuring out how long something is going to take me to do given that time restraint and given all of the other things that I have to do in my life. How am I going to accomplish this task? Right? Even talking about it, I can feel like a shortness of breath, right? Because it's like, oh my God, executive functioning is so intense. But it's required to live in the world that we live in, right? And so a big part of that too is that we cannot become overwhelmed by our emotions. We cannot become overwhelmed by our stress, even though we need a certain amount of stress to do all of these things, which I've also talked about before, that like kind of optimal level of stress. So maybe at this point, I'm going to go ahead and into, okay, so we see that it's a complicated thing, but also all the things I named are very important things in order to be able to function in society, right? So how do we improve on executive functioning? Well, so one is, it might seem like it's putting the cart before the horse, but it is establish a routine, right? And I always tell folks that it doesn't have to be an elaborate routine to start, right? Like we go to sleep, we wake up, we brush our teeth, we have breakfast, right? That's a routine. So I'm assuming that there is some amount of routine that you already have in your life. And so just first notice the strengths, right? Like notice what you're already doing well and then build off of that. So establishing a routine is really important though, in just like being able to have predictability, and being able to kind of maybe not have to factor so much in when you're doing all of this work of executive functioning, right? Because it's like, well, I already know that like, I'm going to get up at this time, I'm going to brush my teeth at this time, I'm going to have breakfast at this time. And so like your body and your mind are already familiar with a certain amount of like what's going to happen each day, which kind of takes the load off of you so that you can do a little bit more executive functioning, have a little bit more flexibility, have a little bit more bandwidth for self-regulation. And the next thing is to then reward yourself, right? So like I said, also focus on your strengths, focus on what you're already doing well, and then figure out a way to reward yourself. I've heard other folks talk about what they've called a dopamine before. I really like that idea. And that's basically having a go-to list of things that give you dopamine, so to speak, right? I mean, dopamine isn't the only feel-good chemical in the brain, but we can talk about that in another video. But like just for shorthand, let's say like something that gives you dopamine, which is that like feel-good rush. And so is it taking a walk outside, petting your dog, having a chunk of cheese, like that will definitely kind of boost those reward systems. But of course, try to have those rewards be something that's not going to lead to a hangover as well, right? Because if it's like, oh, well, like I made my bed, so now I get to take a shot, like, is that like really the best reward, right? Because like that reward's going to come with some consequences later on and probably like inhibit your ability to executive function later down the road, right? Because something like alcohol actually literally does the opposite and shuts off the front part of the brain. So I would not recommend something like something to make you high or drunk. But so try to think of other ways that you get dopamine and make a list about those, and then think about ways that you can reward yourself throughout the day, even if it's just like the point about observation, right? The last point of executive functioning is, even if it's just noticing that you did something well and giving yourself that praise. That's important, right? Like being able to notice what you're doing well is really crucial to so many things. And I would say use a system, right? Use some kind of system in order to help you figure out all of the things that you need to do and to help you make a routine. Because if you're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants, that might work to a certain extent, but once things get more complicated, that really, you can drop things. And so having a system like a planner, setting timers, using Siri, right? A lot of times I call out to Siri and ask her to like set a timer for me, or I ask her to schedule something or to set a reminder at a certain time so that I know to do this, and then I don't have to hold it in my mind anymore, right? Like we have a lot of tools with technology as well where that can really help us have a system in place of how to remember how to execute and what we want to do and what we want to accomplish in a certain day. And then I have the last 3 points are, I think they really go for everything. So they're a little bit like cliche, but I promise you they really do help with executive functioning. And one is exercise. So like I was talking about before, when you're in that like default mode network and you are just kind of maybe dreaming, ruminating, creative thinking, and you're needing to switch into executing on a task, something that can really help is actually like getting your body moving and like doing something with your body and getting your heart pumping. And that can actually like help your brain switch into that network, I think, because of the chemicals that it's supplying to the brain. Right? Like when you do some exercise, we know that it makes you feel better. Why does it make you feel better? Because it does something good for your brain. And so it also helps your brain switch into this mode where it can concentrate. The other one is sleeping, of course. I couldn't be huger on doing whatever it is that you need to do to protect your sleep, right? Because all of the things that I named at the beginning of the video are going to be so much easier if you've had a good night's rest. And I know that that seems really simple, but from what I've seen with my clients and just anecdotally, it seems like a lot of Americans really have a hard time getting enough sleep. And that means like actually getting 8 hours at night, right? Like an actually full out 8 hours. And I think, honestly, I would say like that means also even giving yourself 9 hours, and then like hoping that you'll get a solid 8 out of those 9 that you gave yourself, because who like falls asleep and has a peaceful night's sleep from like the moment that your head hits the pillow until the moment that you wake up, right? So like you need to factor in a little buffer time for your rest as well. And I know that that can be a tall order, but really like you will feel the benefits of it, and you'll be like, wow, it's so much easier to think and execute and organize and control my emotions. And then the last point that I'll make, and I'm going to make more videos about this, and even like there'll be a video about a guided meditation, but meditation is something that I always really suggest as well. And that's going to help you do all the things, again, that I talked about at the beginning of the video, right? Where you can observe yourself, you notice an emotion, you notice a thought, but you practice the skill of not acting on it and just observing it and letting it go. Right? And so if you're practicing that muscle of self-observation and being able to get a little bit of distance from emotions and thoughts so that you can have more say over like how to express them, allowing yourself to fully feel them, if that's what you decide to do in that given moment, because you have the space to do that. But working on that muscle is really the stuff of executive functioning. So I will end with that. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that this is helpful. If you have any other questions, please let me know in the comments. I'm happy to expand on any of the points that I made. And good luck with your executive functioning, and come back for more content. Don't forget to like or subscribe.